everyone. We are so happy this morning to have Gabi Meltzer, very well-known dietitian and certified intuitive eating counselor. On our platform this morning, we've got some amazing questions lined up. As part of her bio, she has non-diet and weight-inclusive counselling, which is amazing, nourishing. She also helps to nourish a healthy relationship with food and body, which I think is important through all the ages, and also a focus on gut health and IBS, which is also fantastic. And I'm going to hand over to you straight away. Well,
Thanks, Kath. Thanks for having me. So I think you've given quite the intro already for who I am and what I do. And yeah, I love working with people of most ages. I work with kids from school-going age up to people in their 70s and 80s, but my main focus is really in whatever act of eating we're covering. We're trying to promote a less stressful, a less guilt-focused way of thinking about food and really think about positive health behavior changes in working towards really like feeling your best and using food to fuel you to do that.
Amazing. And it's so important, I think, with women especially, we really struggle a bit with food, and really we shouldn't. We should rather sort of empower ourselves through knowledge and understand food better and why we need it instead of sort of restricting in that. I'm going to jump into the first question. So what are your top 5 tips for developing a healthy relationship with food and body?
So the first thing is really kind of trying to level out the noise. I think that there is so much access at the moment on so many different platforms, and I mean it's wonderful how much information we can have access to, but it's also very confusing. And I think the first thing would be to start kind of shifting the focus from things that are maybe very black and white. So we want to try and label foods and promote a healthier relationship with them by thinking about more of the grey area. So rather than labeling foods as being good or bad, it could be labeling them as nutritious or as fun, but there is a place for all foods, and I think that's important to recognize. And then another one would be really trying to get more in touch with your own body's cues. So I think a lot of people follow now their minds after lots of different rules that have come up from many different diets over time or from many different people telling them different things rather than following what their body's actually telling them. So what I really help clients with is getting back in touch with what is hunger, what is comfortable hunger, what is fullness, what is comfortable fullness. So yeah, reconnecting to the body. And then also that this kind of goes hand in hand with eating regularly, because having a rhythm that your body can get into really just makes things easier. So food can become a tricky thing because it is primal. We do need it to survive. The more you're trying to delay it, the more you're trying to restrain yourself from it, the more you're going to feel the need for it. So having a regular pattern where you are keeping your energy is really important. And then making choices with foods that are more about health or taking care of yourself rather than just thinking about what am I going to weigh if I eat this. So that becomes also quite tricky. It's not always the same thing, having the goal to lose weight and having the goal to be healthy. And then also I would say maybe unfollowing any accounts that really make you feel bad about your food choices or make you feel bad about your body.
Yeah, that's very, very true. I actually did that after I had my daughter. I did not bounce back at all. And I happened to have a baby at the same time as this very well-known model. And 3 days after giving birth, she posted a picture of her flat stomach, and it did something to me, but I unfollowed immediately. So that's great advice.
That's the thing. We're all individual, very, very challenging
Exactly.
And it's normal to compare, but great to rather just not have that in mind.
Exactly. We see that you offer weight-inclusive counselling. Can you explain to us what that means and who would benefit from that?
Sure. So, I'm not saying that it is a problem to want to lose weight. And I and Megan and myself in our practice both support whatever the client's desire is, whether they want to gain weight or lose weight, whatever it is, we understand the desire to want to lose weight completely. when someone has only a weight focus and is not focused on their health, then it is very, very difficult to keep to those kind of behaviors, because often the thought is very restrictive with whatever the habits are that they're trying to achieve. And what we see in practice, and like this, I've been in practice now for more than 10 years, but I've seen that clients can lose weight. Anyone can lose weight. It's not about that. It's about how do you maintain that afterwards is what's really important. And are you actually getting healthier? So what we do in our practice is we don't use weight as the focused outcome. It is maybe a side effect that may happen when you start taking care of yourself better and when you start having healthier habits, but it shouldn't be the primary endpoint, because also what happens then when you get to that point? You just stop. And then it's really challenging. Or maybe you're making choices out of restriction rather than something that is actually making you healthier.
That's so true. So there's quite a lot of psychology behind it.
A lot. So yeah, I often find my clients say to me, "Oh, you sure this isn't a psychology session?" That it has to be kind of, you can't really separate the two when it comes to food. It has to be dealt with.
Yeah, perfect.
And the other part of weight inclusive counselling is that any person of any weight, we don't see people just because they're a higher weight as being less healthy than someone who's a lower weight. Just for example, like in our practice, we see a lot of eating disorders or disordered eating. You know, just as a comparison, even if someone has a higher BMI or a higher body fat, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're an unhealthier person in comparison to someone who is a much lower weight or a much lower body fat. Because, for example, someone who eats really nutritious foods, who exercises frequently, who sleeps well, who's a non-smoker, who doesn't binge drink, who has a healthy relationship with food, who mentally is healthy, who has time for relaxing activities or hobbies and social life, that is the person who is overall healthiest, no matter what their weight is. And the weight might be one of the factors, but we can also see, for example, like if someone has an eating disorder where they are very low weight, or even somewhere in the middle and you don't really realize it, but they're not doing very healthy things for their body, are they actually healthier? So weight doesn't come into the equation much for us.
Yes, it's more of a comprehensive, holistic viewpoint instead of just targeting one aspect of health and food. Perfect. Okay. Chat to us about food-centered behaviors that are red flags but are normalized in society.
So I think a big one that I often hear from my clients is like this feeling like they need to count what they're eating. They need to count how much protein, they need to count how many calories they're eating, count how many carbs or whatever it is, constantly looking at, calculating things and labels. So it also kind of creates this, or also even watching like how much you're burning off and then how much you can eat. So I know it feels quite normalized now, but that can be quite stressful, and always feeling the need to have to either earn your food or burn off your food or reach this specific requirement. It's not really going according to what your body is telling you. And it's not so realistic with changes in appetite that may happen from one day to the next, or especially in women in different times of the cycle, which I think we get into later. And another thing might be, so with all these different fad diets that come and go, is cutting out something like a whole food group. So we always cycle with these trends, and it kind of goes, it's very confusing between, 1 minute it's a low fat diet, then the next minute it's a Banting or a keto diet, and then it's a carnivore diet versus a vegan diet. So it is so confusing because there's always a new trend.
It's very extremist too, and that's a problem. There's no sort of like middle of the road. It's easier to follow something if you are doing something from a mediocre point of view. Extremist things are hard to stay consistent with. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's the thing. Anyone can do these things for a short time, but I think it's important to think about, do you want to do this forever? Because otherwise you start getting very funny habits that you pick up from each different diet. And then you're completely confused by the end of all of them, like what is actually healthy and what do you actually want to do to be consistent. So those I see often, the cutting out the food groups, the needing to burn off the food or count the food. And then also praising things that require like extreme discipline or extreme restraint. So this is not necessary. What we want to try and focus on rather is not restraint, but more like caring for yourself, attending to yourself. Yeah. So doing things that are going to fuel you, that are going to make you feel more comfortable, that are going to make you feel more energized, that are going to feel more satisfying, that are going to be more sustaining, that are going to add opportunities for nutrition, rather than having this like extreme discipline and willpower to have to do something. That's hard. And that's hard to sustain. And then skipping meals or having to cut out meals because you need to make up for something, or you skipping it because you're I'm going to have this big meal out later, so I'm not going to eat today to allow for those calories. Those are kind of some of the main things that I think have become very normalized, but there's actually a lot of stress around that.
Absolutely. I can think of one other one, but I think we're going to discuss it later on in one of my questions. But okay, so those are very good, valid points to think about, because I think a lot of people think that those are normal things to do now. It's pretty much ingrained.
Yeah.
Okay, can you unpack for us how routine and intuitive eating correlates to each other?
Yeah, so I think, when people think of intuitive eating, they might have a little bit of the wrong idea of, eat whatever, whenever, no rules. And yes, the whole point is not having rules, but sometimes, and this is what I actually find most commonly as problems with my clients, is that we live in a busy world. Like, people have a lot of things they need to get done in a day, and it's hard to actually understand and connect to your body cues sometimes when you are overwhelmed and stressed and really busy and you haven't planned. And kind of, I like to go back to thinking about, how does a school day go? How do you feed your child in a routine, when they're having breakfast before school, they've got 2 break times, they've got something when they come home, they've got dinner, there's very much a routine that is created. But then you leave school and you go into university and you have to do everything on your own schedule, and then you go into work and you have lots of things to control for yourself, maybe plus your families too, and you don't become the priority for kind of having a routine for yourself. So the routine is sometimes necessary to create, even if you are not really that aware that you are hungry, for example. You might need to set something up for yourself, knowing what your day looks like and how you can prioritize feeling your most sustained and energized throughout that day. And so what I often find is that people just lack the routine and lack the plan for themselves, and that makes it really hard to have this kind of comfortable level of stability in their energy throughout the day, and for eating to be something that is not difficult. Because as you get really hungry, then it becomes more primal and more urgent. And it definitely sparks these kind of cravings and these dips. And you might want to choose different foods at that point. And it might feel like the relationship with food is a bit scarier.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's so true. Okay, so we finally come to the big question, fasting.
Mm-hmm.
It is something I have dallied with myself through the years, but I've got extremely low blood pressure, so it does not work for me at all. And as you say, by the time it's time to eat, there is a massive problem. And what I would have usually picked to eat, because normally I'm quite healthy, except for weekends and that, I'm pretty balanced, but it's scary. If there's anything in my way, it will be eaten. It doesn't matter what it is. So do you think it works? I think sometimes, I've heard that some people really rave about it, but what are the kind of, I know it doesn't work for me. I can say that straight up. But what are your kind of indicators besides what I said?
Yeah, so I think everything that you are feeling is what many people do feel, but not everyone does. The thing is, it also really depends, on Yeah, and firstly, is there something else going on? So like I see a lot of clients who have difficult digestive symptoms, for example, uncomfortable gut symptoms. So for example, someone like that is going to feel way more extreme symptoms from having irregularity in a meal pattern and having extremes between feeling either too hungry or feeling too full. If you've got a poor relationship with food and you're trying to restrain yourself to a certain pattern of eating that just fits because it's the rule rather than listening to what your body is telling you, then that can also make it harder to firstly sustain that behavior, but also allow for this kind of feeling of food being on a pedestal. It's more exciting by the time you want it, and you might feel like different things by that point. All I can say is that even if there is evidence for something, there is some research around fasting that there are some benefits. It's very different doing something in a research study, which is a short term, versus doing it in real life. So I think what's important is to consider, what does my life look like? What is my routine of the day? How do I prioritize having the best mood, the best energy, the least amount of hunger and cravings, and how do I take care of myself rather than trying to fit into a rigid pattern. And what I also often find is people are trying to choose a specific window according to a fasting pattern that suits the research. It's impractical in their lives. Like, let's say they can't now eat dinner with their families because it has to be at a certain time, or they starve themselves the whole morning and feel like it's just a struggle getting through the day. Well, maybe there's another kind of pattern that works a little bit better. There's no rigidity into what that number or time needs to look like. And also, we think at the moment that most of the benefits of intermittent fasting are probably more about like the total calorie restriction that would happen in the day rather than specifically the fast itself. There's not really much to say that it is one or the other. So whatever the routine is that works for you, try and think about, how do you feel your best, because that's going to make it the most sustainable. And how does it fit into your routine of your day?
I think also I never realized my low blood pressure was going to be a factor, and I should have immediately kind of cut that and thought, no, this is not going to work for me anyway.
Yeah.
But now I see that there's a 36-hour fast that's trending. There's all these videos with like, watch the fat melt off your stomach, all of these things. And it's quite scary. I mean, that's a long time to essentially starve yourself.
Yeah. And also just thinking about, I mean, like I, being Jewish, once a year do a big fast for 24 hours, yes, basically, and like the hardest thing ever, and I have to stay in bed the whole day. How do you live a normal life with trying to practice fasting for 36 hours in a row? It's just something to think about with, how can you actually fit some of these health behaviors into your lifestyle, and is it actually making you feel healthier, is a good question to ask.
Absolutely. Especially if you've got kids, it's really almost impossible. You need to keep your energy sort of going.
Yeah. Don't want to get hangry.
Let's chat about gut health. What should we include in our diets to assist with this, and what can we do to maintain good gut health?
Okay, so there's a few basic lifestyle things. The first thing is that, for the most part, I see that people don't get enough fiber. In the research, we can see that in South Africa and also similarly around the world, people probably meet about half their fiber requirements. Just going back to something like fasting, for example, so the more meals that you try and cut out in the day, the less opportunities you have to fit in fiber. So that's one thing to think about. It's also less comfortable fitting in loaded fiber at one time. So that's why I was saying spreading your meals out and spreading fiber out also would be much more comfortable, and it is something that you would need to build on. If you only get meeting half your requirements, then you can slowly start picking it up. But fiber is the roughage that we find in any plant food, basically, so that is still whole. So for example, in whole grains and fruits, in vegetables, in nuts, in seeds, in legumes, all of those foods contain fiber. And another thing, going back to some of the fads, is, let's say a carnivore diet, or let's say a low carb diet. might really be cutting out a lot of fiber opportunities. So I often find that those are the kind of diets where people start also having gut kind of issues. So we need to get about at least 25 to 35 grams a day, and I see people getting usually around 12 or 15. So more fiber, more times, more opportunities, more colors. And then also within the fibrous foods, there was a huge study done recently, hundreds of thousands of people, where they looked at the difference in their good gut flora if they had eaten more than 30 different plants over the week versus having significantly less than that. And there doesn't need to be this magic number of 30, but it is kind of just something to think about if you've got these different groups of fibers or plant foods like whole grains, nuts and seeds, legumes, fruits and vegetables. If you're getting kind of a few from each, it's actually pretty easy over the week to get 30 different ones. And then there's also your herbs and your spices that are included in these plant foods too. So the more diversity that we have from the different ones, so let's say not sticking to only eating just one type of fruit per week, or not eating just one type of vegetable per week, or not only feeling safe with one kind of whole grain food, which I often find. Yeah, like for example, people think oats is okay, but not bread for some reason from like a dietary perspective. And so just expanding the diversity within the different ranges of the plant foods is really helpful, because we don't just want more good gut flora, we want more diversity. And that comes from the different kind of plant foods. And all the colors also contain different antioxidants. So we want to really diversify within the different foods. And then, of course, things like managing stress, having enough relaxed time, that has a significant impact on the gut, and especially because of the gut-brain axis. And for the most part, find when I'm dealing with gut-related clients that there's this impact of this stress or busy kind of lifestyle, or stress around food. Often these people who are dieting in an extreme way, it's also affecting their gut. So, or stress around food because they're thinking the food is worsening the symptoms. So the gut-brain axis, that's really important. Movement, so that's definitely beneficial for your gut health. And then things like smoking and alcohol. So those would be factors that would contribute to worsened gut health, and then getting enough sleep. Yeah, I think it's also important to just see where food fits into the picture overall. It's a big benefit if you can add in more foods into your diet, but it's also not the only thing, and the whole lifestyle is something to look at.
Yes.
And sometimes it's not feasible to do all the parts at once, but it's finding where can you begin and then where can you build on that.
I've read so many studies on the correlation between sleep and food, and it is huge, the huge driving factor. And also, I just suddenly thought now, wouldn't an introduction, I know this sounds quite funny, but perhaps the person's not great in the kitchen, and introducing them to making soups, stir fries, different salads, because you need quite a few components. So, if you're making a soup, you can throw in 5 veggies in there, if not more.
Exactly.
And it's a clever way, or a stir fry. I mean, you can get rid of 5 already in that. So maybe doing like a cooking course would actually help you with your food intake.
I love that you're thinking in that way, and that's the thing. It's diversity, and it also, the diversity not only fuels your good gut flora, but it's also more satisfying. So it's not as exciting eating the one same thing every single day.
Terrible.
And it's also more visually appealing on the plate when you've got different colors to look at.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And then a smoothie, for example, could be like with different fruits, for example.
Yes, exactly. Or a fruit salad. Fruit salads have gone out of fashion. They must come back.
Yeah, love a fruit salad.
Yeah. Okay, we're going back to this now. As women, we are all familiar with fluctuations due to our cycles. Tracking apps suggest that we eat certain foods during certain phases. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so you are probably going to feel a little bit different in the different phases of your cycle. And I think just in terms of, again, trying not to overly stress around food and create more of a fuss and more of a thing to think about, we want to create less stress around food. I think our bodies are quite capable of telling us what we need. And yes, you might go through different phases of your cycle where you feel more hunger or you feel like you are craving more for certain types of foods. That's the kind of attunement that would be the most important. So starting to trust your own body cues is way less stressful, and also having some kind of foundation of eating enough of a variety of nutrients consistently enough so that you feel like you are nice and stabilized. Look, there might be some benefit to thinking about sometimes maybe you need a little bit more at certain times, maybe there's certain nutrients that can be beneficial, but I also wouldn't want it to become this thing that now, you have to track and you have to make sure that at certain times of the month that you need to be getting in certain things. I think that listening to your body and having that foundation is the most important.
Yes. And also maybe, like, I don't have a sweet tooth at all, but I definitely crave a bit of sweetness. So having a healthier alternative, so a piece of fruit, and if that's not cutting it, a dark chocolate, which is better than the normal dairy, the milk chocolate. So maybe prep.
Yeah. So almost to know, like if you know that around that time of the month you crave more of those things, and maybe giving yourself that permission and thinking about, if I'm craving for more sweet things, what do I want to have available that is actually going to satisfy me? And think about adding those to your day rather than, only eating those things, because then you're going to land up being even hungrier.
And also to give yourself a bit of grace, because you're already not particularly feeling wonderful, and now you're restricting yourself, and it can sort of exasperate the really not so great feelings.
And I think that's really important also in that relationship with food, is knowing that, no one meal or one day of eating or one treat that you give yourself is ever going to ruin your health, or is ever going to automatically just, turn to fat mass, or, make you gain weight, or make you unhealthy.
Immediate.
So that's the thinking, because it feels like you're so bad if you've got that mindset, and you might feel heavy from the decision in making that choice and thinking, I ruined it. That's a heaviness in itself. But it's impossible that any one food just decides, I'm going to go and turn into fat mass, or I'm going to make you unhealthy. It's about what are you doing for the most part that really makes a difference. So any of these additions actually make it easier to feel like, it's not on such a pedestal. If you do eat it and there's certain times you crave it more, leaning into it might make it feel not as much of a challenge and not as much of a need to overdo it when you do.
Exactly. It doesn't become such a craving, such a big thing. So, you won't want so much of it as well if it's not like this big restricted food. It just makes you want it more. Gosh, and now we've ended up on emotional eating. There's so much to say on that. I think, I know, well, myself included, emotional eating just happens. It happens, and I think it's great to have awareness when you're doing that and just kind of understand what you're doing, and also not to kind of put those negative feelings. I mean, at least you can stop. Tomorrow's a new day and we'll carry on with our regular eating, but well, what are your thoughts with emotional eating, and sort of how to, I don't want to say control it, because that's also, but just to move through it with grace and slowly sort of turn it into a healthier practice?
Sure. So I think the important thing to think about with emotional eating is first to ask a question like, is it making me feel better? Is it actually ending in that? Because Sorry, there was a call coming through there. So it's normal to link food to emotions. I mean, since we are babies, we are literally, like crying. The mom attends to you by feeding you, like from the breast, from day one, or from the bottle, whatever it is. It's like a signal. It's a comfort. It's normal that food can be seen as a comfort. We also use food emotionally in cultural things, in celebrations, in social connecting. So we connect over food experiences. So there's absolutely no shame in linking emotions to food. So that's the first thing. I think that the second thing is it making you feel better? So if you choose food as a source of comfort, the outcome should be you feel more comforted. Only becomes a problem when there's this negative loop around it. So when there's now guilt and there's now shame, and then it becomes, oh, I've ruined it all, let me just carry on. And then it becomes after that, oh, well, I'll start again tomorrow. Then you're kind of putting yourself back into this negative cycle. And so if food isn't the only coping tool, and if you can actually notice it as being maybe one of the tools in your toolbox that can make you feel better, then you might want to decide how much actually makes you feel better. Because the whole point is to use it as a way to get to feeling, if it's whether it's less sad and makes you happy in the moment, or whether it makes you less anxious, or whatever it is, it's not going to solve the problem. But if it is something that you're doing in the moment and it's helping momentarily, it's probably a more healthy thing to do than many other things that could be worse.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's also just taking away the shame from it. But if it's not feeling good and you're landing up feeling uncomfortable afterwards, or you're feeling guilty, or you're feeling like that was so not worth it, like you feel bloated and stuffed and lethargic and no energy, whatever it is, well then it's something to consider with, is there a better tool for that specific emotion?
Exactly. Okay, so let's get down to practicality. What is your rule of thumb for building a healthy plate? So I split this question up into 3. So a healthy plate for a regular woman, a healthy plate for a perimenopausal woman, and then for a pregnant.
So either way, we have this foundation of a healthy plate for all ages and for all stages. And it's not not a rigid rule, but it is helpful in just thinking about creating more opportunity for more nutrient diversity over the day, because you're getting in more food groups in that way. And it's also helping to satisfy and sustain you longer with more diversity on that plate. So generally, thinking about the plate as 3 or 4 different parts, if you had to divide the plate into half and then a quarter and a quarter, we could try and prioritize that a half of the plate could come more from colourful foods. So because we want to get in more plant diversity, there's lots of different colours to get in, lots of fibre that can be had from those kind of foods, then you could think about half the plate being more from colourful stuff, so your fruits or your vegetables. Then a quarter of the plate could be more from your carbohydrate kind of foods, which are your energy foods. And then another quarter of the plate being more from your protein types of foods. And then kind of as a little part of that, because it's richer, because it's more filling, the fats might be more of like just a drizzle of a sprinkle, whatever. It's kind of just a little addition to that. That would be kind of a foundation of just a balanced, healthy plate. But it doesn't mean that it has to be like a solid rule. Like, let's say one meal of the day just doesn't have one of those food groups. It really doesn't matter. It's more about over time, more often than not, that you're getting in all of those food groups. And it does help that, for example, like proteins and fats will sustain the energy foods longer and make you feel fuller for longer if you're combining them with those energy foods. And then the fiber and all those colors will add all the nutrients, but also the fiber will slow that release of that energy too. So it just helps in satisfaction and sustaining power, and the more you have on the plate. And also in terms of satisfaction, even visually, it feels more filling and more satisfying when you've got different textures to feel through, different tastes and different visual components on that plate.
So true, actually. You eat with your eyes first.
Definitely. And then when you're in other phases of life, you might add in other things that you might consider even more so as in part of those food groups, but the plate would kind of remain the same to try and get all of the different macronutrients in. Just for example, in a perimenopausal woman, like let's say you're going into the phase of life where you're really thinking about now like your bone health more, you're thinking about your gut health more. I think naturally as you age, you start to think about your hormonal health, you start to think about, healthy aging. So you might want to add in more within the certain food groups, more on a micronutrient level, but you don't really you don't have to fixate on the micronutrients if you're getting a balance from different macronutrients consistently for the most part, because then you will get them from having a variety of foods.
I think there's a lot of data at the moment saying that perimenopausal women need to eat a certain amount of protein, and it seems like so much. It actually, to work it out as well, it's not that easy. It's quite, how would you, I know an egg is very good at being, and cottage cheese and chicken, but chicken, I mean, you can only have so much chicken and then tuna and all of that, but it's difficult to try and get that amount of protein into your...
So I think often it sounds like it is a lot more than what it actually is that you do need. I think the biggest thing that I can suggest is that if you do include some form of protein at most times that you eat, and this doesn't need to be an exact portion that you're thinking about, but it actually is, and it's also dependent on your weight, how much you need. So some people definitely don't need as much as others, and it depends also on how much activity you are doing. But having some form of protein with each meal really helps you to quite easily get to the target of the day without needing to count it. And I think what people don't realize is that protein doesn't only come in protein-specific foods. We do have that so we call it a protein food if the main macronutrient that it serves is protein. So like in your chicken and your eggs and your fish and your meat. But for example, things like your grains and your nuts and your seeds and your legumes all contain protein, or your dairy was another one that is actual protein. So having diversity on the plate, and then your veggies also have some protein. So I think the confusion comes in when you think, I have to eat only like this protein specific part of the plate. So that protein part is one portion of the protein, but you're also getting protein from the rest of the plate adding up to that. So let's say having, rather than just egg, but eggs and toast and some vegetables, you're actually getting a lot more protein in from the diversity of that plate than you think.
Exactly. Amazing. I didn't actually think of that. But there's actually like a bit of maths going on.
So you don't need to be doing the math, but having a diversity of nutrients and eating enough times, fueling your body throughout the day with a wide variety of different foods from different food groups.
Yes.
That's a priority.
Okay, perfect. Oh, that was actually the next question. Top tips for including protein in your diet and adding more as you get older. But you pointed out, rightly so, that this is dependent on your activity level. So, for instance, if you're one of those people that is now weight training, because apparently it's really great for a lot of things as you're hitting perimenopause and all of that. So you should have sort of protein at every meal time. And as you said, you're getting it from everything, actually, not just your main source of protein on the plate.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think that's what people in every meal time.
Yeah, well, in most, and maybe it is to think about like in snack times, it's also an opportunity. So maybe adding something like some yogurt, or adding something like some nuts, or adding like a trail mix, or adding some crackers where you're putting some protein on it, like some cheese or some tuna or some egg or some hummus or whatever. So there are opportunities within meals and in snacks to get that for the day.
Exactly.
I would say actually just having a consistency in eating enough would be an easier way to think about getting enough.
Okay, great. Last question. How does movement benefit diet, digestion, and everything to do with that? How do the two sit together? I imagine they're very...
Very much so. So, I was saying earlier that a lot of people don't almost notice their hunger. So sometimes people will just get used to not eating, and they'll say, no, I've never eaten breakfast in the morning, I don't feel hunger, or whatever it is. It doesn't mean because you don't feel hunger that your body doesn't need food. Exercise can actually make you more attuned to your body as well. So it can make you feel the sensations more, so for what your body actually requires from you. It can also boost your energy. So we also want to try and choose exercises that are going to make us feel better rather than worse. So, you don't want to kind of kill yourself in whatever the workout is. It must feel like it is making you feel more connected to your body, or more confident in what your body can do, or have more energy after the workout, or it might definitely promote digestion. So sitting the whole day doesn't make it as easy for everything to move along the gut. It will definitely be easier once you've started having some kind of emotion and mobility, so in whatever form that is. And then it definitely supports even mood. So to just feel afterwards like you get that endorphin release, or you feel like that confidence in your body for what you can do. It can also help you to sleep better if you've like really burnt off some steam, or if you've kind of used it as your time out that's just for you for the day, where you can forget everything else. So it really can reduce the stress too. Yeah, and then in terms of the muscle strength and the muscle retention, also as we age, it does become more and more of a priority as well to keep that muscle strong and stable. But having some kind of resistance movement, and generally the thought is more like 2 to 3 times in a week, is very, very protective for your bone health as well. So
Yes.
and support that composition, in that you have more muscle mass in comparison to body fat, that you have better bone health and better strength, and then also just mobility over time, so that you can age easier and be able to do things easier.
Okay, fantastic. I wanted to ask you, if someone has been watching and they really want to come see you and need a few appointments, how would they get hold of you?
So either they can message me directly from Instagram as a DM. I've got a website where if you're looking at this now from Instagram, then you can go just to my profile and see my web address there, and you can book an appointment directly online there. I also do offer a free 15-minute first call just to get to know each other a bit better and discuss how we could work together. I am actually about to go on maternity leave though in the next 2 weeks, but my colleague Megan, who works in my practice, is going to be available and taking over my clients in my practice for the next 6 months or so. But I'll always be available to just answer and kind of put things onto her if need be. And otherwise, yeah, WhatsApp is also another on my website. All my details are there too, or email as well. So on any platform, but whatever's easiest.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us today, and good luck for the future with the little baby. It will be so lovely to maybe catch up in a year's time or so, but thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. It's been great to chat with you.